All right, I've got 2 o'clock, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Thank you all for joining Environment America today for our webinar on powering your city's operations with on-site solar energy. My name is Emma Searson. I'm the Go Solar Campaign Director with Environment America. And one of the efforts I oversee is our national Mayors for Solar Energy project, bringing cities across the country together to advocate for and transition to a future powered by clean and renewable solar energy. So that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. Just to quickly review the agenda for this event, I'll start with a quick introduction to Environment America's Go Solar campaign and the webinar series and campaign that today's event is part of. Then we will hear from Chad Lorentz, who's a principal at Cadmus specializing in renewable energy, as an expert on why and how cities can go about pursuing solar energy installations. Then after that, I'll turn it over to a couple of representatives from cities that have successfully installed solar energy on numerous city properties to share some of their experiences and tips for others who are interested in following suit. So first we'll have Michael Catanzaro, the City of Tucson's energy manager. He can speak to Tucson's solar projects, and then we'll have John Odell, the director of the City Energy and Asset Management Division in Worcester, Massachusetts, who can tell us more about his community's work as well. We will have plenty of time for questions. We'll mostly take questions at the end of this webinar, so you can either hold on to them until the end, or you can go ahead and type them in the chat as you think of them, and we'll just circle back at the end. So let's go ahead and jump right in with a quick introduction to Environment America's Go Solar campaign. So the goal of our Go Solar campaign is to defend and advance solar policy at the local, the state, and the federal levels all across the country. So we do this along with our network of state organizations, with staff in over 29 states working on solar and renewable energy. And we do research, public engagement, policy development, advocacy, media work, and we also partner with a lot of other organizations in this space. So some of you might already know us from our Mayors for Solar Energy project or the Shining Cities report that we produce each year, ranking major US cities by how much solar energy they have installed. Those projects, as well as this webinar series, are all part of the work we're doing to further solar energy at the municipal level through our Go Solar campaign and our Mayors for Solar Energy project. So let's talk for a second about why solar is something we're focused on. There are several reasons that Environment America and our state partners have prioritized solar among our renewable energy campaigns specifically. So first and foremost for us as an environmental organization, solar is pollution-free compared to fossil fuel and other energy sources. It's a really clean option. Second, it's also virtually limitless. And since there's no actual fuel cost once you've created the solar panels, it's also getting more and more affordable with every day. So this chart is just a quick visualization of the US annual electricity consumption. You can see that in the bottom right circle in red, versus all of the potential we have with renewable energy and with solar in particular. So the yellow and orange circles represent the technical potential for solar energy in the US. There is enough sunlight hitting our country every year to power our electricity needs 100 times over. So plentiful is an understatement. Solar energy is also widely popular. It regularly polls as the most popular energy source with 80 to 90% approval ratings, and it enjoys that support across party lines and with folks who wouldn't consider themselves to be environmentalists because of all of its environmental and non-environmental benefits. So to touch on a couple of those, it is tangible and it's transformative. People can see solar in their neighborhoods, on their kids' schools, at their favorite local businesses. And when people take the step of installing solar energy on their home or business, they're actually transforming their relationship with energy by generating it themselves and understanding how that impacts their lives and their electric bills. Solar energy can also be deployed at any scale. So on rooftops at a home-to-home level, or on commercial buildings, or even in large utility-scale farms that power tons of homes nearby. And finally, solar offers community benefits at the local level right where it's installed. It creates local jobs that are hard to outsource, and it can help to lower electricity rates for residents, businesses, and governments, so it saves everyone money on their electricity bills. So with all of those benefits and millions of available rooftops and all the necessary infrastructure already in place, as well as vast public support, America's cities have a golden opportunity to be leaders in the transition to renewable energy through solar. And many are already taking advantage of that opportunity. This is a chart from the annual Shining Cities report I mentioned briefly, just showing how major US cities across the country are installing solar energy and showing their leadership potential in that capacity. But even with this leadership, we can see right here, many cities have a lot of solar energy potential left untapped. And we know that local governments can drive further solar development through effective public policy and through strong programs. So part of our mission here at Environment America is to provide the tools, the resources, and peer learning opportunities that can help cities across the country take advantage of the sun. So our 10 Ways Your Community Can Go Solar Toolkit is just one example. And consists of a series of guides to help cities use all of the different policy tools available to them to adopt clean and renewable energy to power their communities. This Mayors for Solar webinar series is another, and enables city leaders from across the country to learn from one another's experiences when it comes to solar energy development. So today we are going to hear from several experts on powering municipal operations with solar energy, namely through on-site installations. But first, I want to name just a few opportunities for solar energy that exist in most communities. So there are numerous opportunities in most cities to power municipal operations with solar energy. This is just a few. First, public school buildings can be excellent solar opportunities as they are significant power users, they're centers for learning, and they often boast big flat roofs that are really perfect for solar panels. And can benefit a lot from some energy savings. And then, of course, in a school setting, solar projects can double as environmental education opportunities in the classroom. Closed landfills and other properties that have limited uses, like former industrial sites or vacant lots, can often also house larger scale solar projects. And providing clean energy for your city is often the best possible use for those sites as well. Cities also frequently manage facilities that require a steady energy supply around the clock. Wastewater treatment facilities, for example, need power all the time and can benefit from on-site solar systems that both lighten their environmental footprint and add a layer of reliability, especially when they're paired with on-site storage. And then city-owned parking lots or garages also get lots of sun exposure and can be great places for solar carports or rooftop systems that double as shade for parked vehicles. So the bottom line here is that any city-owned rooftop with enough space and sun exposure should also be considered as a potential solar site. The more visible the building is to the public, the better it can serve as a demonstration, in addition to being a clean power provider. Some examples include City Hall, police and fire stations, and public libraries. It's just important to take a look at the potential of each one of those projects before getting started. So that's all I've got by means of a quick introduction. As I mentioned, we're going to have a lot of time for questions towards the end. But I want to go ahead and hand it off to Chad Lorentz with Cadmus to talk a little bit more about why and how cities can go about pursuing solar installations. All right, Chad, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Emma. Hey, everyone. This is Chad Lorentz from Cadmus Group, and I've helped a number of communities across the country go through the procurement process and have worked at all levels of government supporting the development of solar and other renewable energy policies. So I threw together a few slides here on sort of why and how cities might be able to add solar as part of their portfolio, their energy portfolio. So next slide. here's sort of what I'm going to talk about. Rather than talk about this slide, I'll just start talking about what I'm going to talk about, so we can go to the next slide. So why solar? Emma did a great job of sort of teeing this up. In most jurisdictions within the US, the solar PV system that lasts 25 or 30 years is going to pay for itself. And in many states, many times over that lifespan. And so there's economic benefits to installing solar PV on municipal operations. There's the local economic development, the jobs for particularly rooftop and canopies and smaller scale commercial size projects are inherently local or regional jobs they're going to have to draw from in order to get those installations built. Of course, climate and energy goals that cities have. Many cities are passing 100% renewable energy pledges. States are lining up to pass similar 100% renewable goals, and even some utilities have 100% or 80% either clean energy or renewable goals. So you can help all of those different levels of interested parties meet those climate and energy goals by installing solar. And of course, as Emma mentioned, leading by example, and there's studies that have been funded by the Department of Energy done by Yale University that show that solar is contagious. And so if your neighbor has solar, you're much more likely to have solar. If you see solar on City Hall or on other city properties, folks then tend to say, well, maybe I can do solar as well. Next slide. In terms of how you go about going solar or installing solar as a municipality, the state policy context is really the key. Every state is different in terms of its renewable energy and solar policy. When my colleagues from other countries and in other countries that I've worked in ask what is the US solar policy, I say that we have at least 50 of them. And so understanding that local context really does factor into what are the different ways that you can go about going solar or putting solar on facilities, and how easy or difficult it is, and also what the economic returns are. And so this is just one example where third-party ownership is allowed in a select number of states. And that third-party ownership, as they'll talk about, as one of the ways that a municipality can get solar on its operations with little to no upfront cost, but it's not available everywhere. So it's really important for any city to understand the policy context in which it's operating before determining exactly what its options are in terms of getting solar installed on municipal operations. Next slide. So there are two basic ownership options, and there are some others like community solar and virtual power purchase agreements and things that we're not going to go into today. These are the two basic ones. So direct ownership, so the city owns, maybe pays for an operations and maintenance contract from the installer, but owns the system. That system generates electricity, and the meter that is on that site spins forward or backward depending on how that power is being used, and then depending on the local regulations determines how the utility compensates you for the power that is going back into the grid, and sort of netting that out. So when you hear terms and policies like net metering, it's how does the utility value the energy as it's flowing in two directions. And so that facility would be financed through a bond or some other municipal funding opportunity that the city or town goes out and buys the system, and they own it and operate it for the 25 or 30 years that system is going to last. And then based on that previous slide, third-party ownership is the other most popular option among municipalities. And that has no upfront costs, usually has immediate savings that go back to the municipality, slightly lower risk as the installer is in charge of the system. They own and operate the system, but there is usually a long-term contract involved, 10 or 25 years. And it essentially allows for municipalities and other tax-exempt entities to take advantage of the federal tax credit, which is currently 30%, going down to 26% next year. And it allows a third party to own and operate that system, and then sell the power back to the municipality, either through what's called a net metering credit arrangement or some other power purchase agreement, or a lease. And so again, this allows someone else to own it, and then sell that power, usually at a discount, back to the municipality over the term of that system. And so the municipality would have two different contracts, usually with that third part, with the solar installer. a site lease that allows them to own and operate the system on municipal property, and then a power purchase agreement that transfers the value generated by that system back to the utility, to the municipality's electric or utility bills. Next slide. And so in states that allow the third-party ownership, sometimes it can seem sort of too good to be true. And there are also risks and rewards available for either owning and operating a project or contracting with a solar installer to do the third-party ownership model. So the rewards, so the project owner under a third-party ownership model, they get the tax benefits, so the federal investment tax credit, any state tax credits, accelerated depreciation. They also get the state revenue from various incentives, if there are any within the state, and then the PPA contract revenue from the municipality, and then potentially a lease payment as well. So that's what the project owner or developer is getting under the third-party ownership model. And then the municipality in exchange gets low-cost sort of long-term power contract from the project owner, and it's part of a sustainable energy, procurement. They're saying they're providing, helping to get more renewable energy on the grid by having that arrangement with a third party. And so what are the risks of these arrangements? So under a third-party ownership model, the project owner, they take the market price and regulatory risk. There's municipal default risk, really low. Usually municipalities are around for a long time. They take on the project performance risk, the permitting, development, operations, and maintenance costs, and all those associated timing of those risks. And then the municipality, there's some regulatory risk, because again, third-party ownership is allowed through state regulations. So if those regulations were to change, there's potential risk there. Market electricity price risk. So the PPA is usually a fixed term or discount over that time period. And so there's some risk that if energy prices went extremely low, that the municipality could end up paying more under that PPA than they would by not having that PPA in place. And then incentive timing risk, which just means that based on the tax credit step downs at the federal level or whatever state solar policies might exist, there could be, you may miss out on particular benefits depending on when the project gets built. So those are just some of the risks and rewards that municipalities weigh, in particular under a third-party ownership model. Under the direct ownership model, it's really making sure that the system is installed properly, is maintained properly, is designed well, situated well in terms of it's facing the right direction. It's really those types of risks and warranty sort of failure risks, but those are often covered, again, under the warranty and the procurement and construction contract that a municipality would sign with a solar developer. Next slide. So, usually, and 99% of the time, the municipality has to do an RFP, request for proposals, in order to get a project built, whether it's a PPA, third-party ownership model, or direct model. And just some guidance, sort of this is at a very high level, and there's a lot more detailed guidance out there and sample and model requests for proposals. But make sure you're offering details about the proposed project. So if you've done any initial feasibility assessments, sort of roughly what type of size system you're interested in, what are the building loads and usage at that site. Doing stakeholder engagement ahead of time is really important, making sure that neighbors and the facilities operators and others within the city and municipality know that you're looking to put solar on this location. There have been many municipalities that I've worked with that were surprised by the number of people that were opposed to, one tree being trimmed or cut down in order to make room for a solar parking canopy. And they didn't think anyone would have a problem with putting solar over an existing parking lot. But because one tree had to be cut down, issues can arise. So the stakeholder engagement is really key. And then making sure in the RFP that you have an understanding of installation timeline, restrictions, requirements, and then planning ahead so that bidders have a decent amount of time to respond and put together their proposals, where they'll do their own sort of site assessments as part of the RFP process. Next slide. In terms of contracting, some and it's some terms that I often look for when I'm looking at either a power purchase agreement or other agreements between a municipality and a contractor. So on a PPA, like over the 20 years, the project may be assigned to another entity or another system operator over that time frame. And so making sure that the municipality approves that and that those assignments are to someone who's in the business of operating a solar PV system. Making sure that there's timelines that are in place, and that if the developer isn't meeting those timelines, the municipality can sort of walk away and find someone else to get the project completed. Making sure that their per kilowatt hour rate of the PPA and percentage escalation levels or percentage discounts is clear. If there's a buyout timeframe and procedures, so if the municipality wants to own the project at some point during the term, important to know what those conditions are and how the municipality would go about doing that. Making sure that there's some form of a performance guarantee. This is either if it's a third-party ownership model or direct ownership, is making sure that the equipment's going to perform the way that it should. Default provisions, again, if somebody's not doing their job, how do you rectify that? Making it clear on property taxes. In a number of states, it still remains unclear how PV systems are and should be taxed. And if there's a payment in lieu of taxes in terms of taxing the equipment and how that's treated. So flagging that early. Query checks or background checks for installers that might be working on schools or installing in schools, important to flag that. And then other specific municipal requirements like indemnification and insurance requirements, making sure that that's all flagged early in the process. Next slide. So this just goes through sort of at a high level what the procurement process might look like. So again, early stage goal setting, planning, getting the municipality's team together, stakeholder engagement, what are the goals of the project, getting that internal team assembled, that this is what we're doing and here's what we need help from in terms of in-house counsel within the municipality, the procurement office in the municipality, and the operations and building managers at the different facilities that the solar is going to be installed. Collecting all the data and helping identify those sites so that that's identified in the RFP and that you have the energy data that the installers are going to ask for, writing the request for proposals, evaluating those proposals, and then drafting and responding to the different contractual documents. And then cities can play an important role in terms of streamlining the approval process. So assembling the permitting folks, the zoning folks, the fire department, fire and safety folks that might want to review set roof setbacks, making sure that all the permitting and zoning requirements of the project are clear. A municipality can go a long way to save costs by streamlining all of those soft and process costs along the way as well. And next slide. And then lastly, we are also part of a program run by the Department of Energy called SolSmart, which is a designation for programs that reduce those aforementioned soft costs that I was talking about. And if a community demonstrates that they've implemented sort of some of those best practices, they can get designated as bronze, silver, or gold. We currently have about 250 cities and counties across the country that have been designated under SolSmart. And if you're participating in that program, you can get up to 100 hours of free technical assistance from folks like Cadmus and our other partners on the team, the Solar Foundation, ICMA, the National Renewable Energy Lab. So if you have procurement questions and you are part of participating in SolSmart, which is free to participate in, and you can learn at solsmart.org. There are folks that can provide free help to help you think in more detail about how you might go about getting solar on municipal facilities. And I think that is my last slide.
Awesome. Folks, Chad actually has to run before our question and answer session. So if you have a question for Chad, go ahead and plop it in the chat or raise your hand now, and I am happy to make sure that he sees those and can answer just a couple before he has to run.
Thanks, Emma. I'm also happy to entertain any questions if folks want to email me directly. If you think of something later on, feel free to reach out.
Perfect. Yeah, that SolSmart program is definitely an excellent option as well, something we promote. too. So I'm glad you mentioned it, and definitely encourage people to reach out about it or anything else. All right, I don't see any questions in the chat at this point, or any raised hands, Chad. So I think it sounds like you explained everything and everyone understands solar energy. But I'll definitely reach out if anything comes up later. Thanks so much.
Perfect. I'll take it. Yeah, thank you everyone for your time and the invitation.
Absolutely. Awesome. So next, I am going to turn it over to Michael Catanzaro, the City of Tucson's Energy Manager, so that we can hear a little bit more about Tucson's solar projects and some takeaways.
Thanks a lot, Emma. As you said, I'm Michael Catanzaro. I'm the Energy Manager for the City of Tucson. I started here about 9 or 10 months ago, and you could go ahead on to the other slide. And I walked into the middle of this solar blitz that I will call, that we're in the middle of. We had about 50 projects maybe even more, 60 projects still under consideration. And near the beginning of this calendar year, we started installation on 46 different sites. And so I'll just walk you through this. This here is a picture of one of our parks solar installations that was recently completed. So if you go on to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about where we've been and the current projects and some of the financial implications of these projects that I think are really important in terms of selling the projects, and then talk about the challenges and opportunities. So our current solar installations, we have over 7 megawatts of solar. We own 3.6 megawatts, and we have a solar service agreement, which is similar to a power purchase agreement where we purchase the energy from the panels. And it's important to note here that the City of Tucson doesn't retain any of the renewable energy credits for these projects. The city chose, when they were installing these projects, to monetize those in order to help fund and pay for the projects long term. So our local utility purchases those renewable energy credits from us in order to meet their solar goals. So looking at the next slide, now that we're in what I call the 2019 solar blitz, we have we contracted and put out an RFP. We considered virtually all of our 2,500 city electrical meters. So we own water, and we also, that quantity is also a lot of street lights and transportation meters from across the city. So it was pretty easy to eliminate a bunch of sites just because space considerations. There were 107 sites that were deemed feasible or practical. And of those, we're down to about 46 sites now that we're contracted and moving forward on. And you take a look at the next slide. And this is Randolph Golf Course. At the top there on the left-hand side, they decided to add electric golf carts as opposed to the gas golf carts. So we were able to oversize this system, which is kind of exciting. So it's a little bit cleaner and greener. So the current progress is we've completed 10 of our 46 sites, or 2.6 out of our 13.7 additional megawatts. And these are all solar service agreements. So the city just purchases the energy produced from the panels, and there's no initial investment cost. Currently, we have 3 sites under construction, and the remaining 33 sites are in some form of permitting or just sort of getting queued up to go. So if we go to the next slide, this is a terrible map of the solar arrays across the city. The black dots that are difficult to see are the existing sites that we have solar on. The green dots are the new sites where we're installing solar, and the red dots are the yet to be constructed sites. So you can see it's spanning an extraordinary area. And so the project management has really been first rate. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the challenges. From the next slide, you'll see one of our other parks, and I want to talk at a high level about the financial implications. This is one place where I think a lot of municipalities, and there's consistently misunderstanding. So a solar service agreement, there's no out-of-pocket costs for the municipality or owner of the project. You simply purchase the electricity from the site, from the being generated. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see what I'd call a simple savings chart. On the bottom in the yellow, I would call it, or maybe orange, that's our solar bill over the course of the 20 years. The city of Tucson decided to do a 20-year power solar service agreement. We have a flat escalator, so that means that we're purchasing electricity. It's at about 12.5 cents, and we chose to make that flat. Now you can put escalators in there, you can put de-escalators. The city of Tucson chose to be flat over the term, and you'll see that the chart kind of goes down because the efficiency of the panels goes down over year to year. The red is the utility bill going forward, and here on this chart we are projecting a 2.5% utility escalator, and that's a really important consideration, is where do you put that in order to measure the savings. I'll say a little bit more about that in just a moment. And then the white bars at the top are the avoided costs if we had been purchasing solely from the utility. So in this particular chart and at this particular park, Quincy Douglas Park, we have a 2.5% escalator, $14,000 in year one, and $800,000 over the life of the project. That $800,000 seems really high, probably to you, and that's because of the 2.5% escalator. But it's just sort of a grounding. Our local utility put in front of our corporation commission, who approves rate increases, a 7.8% rate increase. And so if we only, for next year, and so if we only take that into account, and there's no other escalators over the course of the next 20 years, the savings for the life of the project is $595,000. So it's really, that escalator really can make a project look really attractive or not as attractive, but at the very least, you're fixing your costs and you have known costs for that percentage of your commodities in the future. And to me, that's something that's really invaluable. Next slide is just sort of a snapshot that we put together for City Council, actually, of our completed projects. Give the members of the City Council a sense of the system sizes, where they're at, how much electricity they'll generate over their life. And we're doing mostly parking, solar installations, parking canopies, and shade in the summer is really nice in Tucson. The estimated year one savings, and then on the right-hand side, you'll see the environmental equivalents. And this is something that both Chad and Emma touched on, but there are considerable environmental benefits. And so trying to make those real for folks is really, I think, an important part of the process. And so we just try to put some numbers to the impact of these projects. On the next slide, you'll see another one of our recently completed. This is Freedom Park. And we had, as each site gets constructed, we'll take some aerials and do some photography. And I find it really helpful as we're going to put together a large solar map of all the installations around the city. And I want to touch, I think, on the opportunities and challenges of doing these solar projects. As I mentioned, you're really changing the makeup of your electricity. Arizona is a really coal-dependent state. More than 60% of our energy in Arizona comes from coal. So anything we can do to offset the impact of that, and solar is probably the cleanest and easiest way to do that, to really make a dent in terms of our environmental impact. There's huge cost savings, as I've talked about, and depending on how you want to quantify that, that's a really, to me, that can be a real driver of the projects. But generally, as I think Emma said, people are generally pro solar. It's not a big a fight as it used to be. And I can't overstate the impact of fixing a percentage of your energy costs. Looking at energy and utility bills over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, looking at the escalators and seeing sort of what it does, a 7.8% increase for the city of Tucson is almost $1.5 million to our budget. So those are big numbers when you're talking about the volume and percentage of energy. So to the extent that you can fix and know those costs going forward, it really makes budgeting a lot easier. Some of the challenges of doing these types of projects is the buy-in and contracting. That can be a really long process. But for the city of Tucson, we're working on 46 sites over the course of basically 12 to 18 months. And we have 8 departments, 40 unique sites, and almost 61 different stakeholders that we've identified that we'll be working with closely or fairly closely over the course of these projects. And so it's a lot of coordination. And if you have a really capable project team, it goes really well, and your developer makes a big difference in terms of if that's going to be a really heavy load or a light load. We have a terrific partner that we've been working with on these sites, and they breeze through construction, and each site is about an 8 to 9 week process. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see an example schedule, and this is, this is at scale, and this was given to me by our developer, but it gives you at a high sense, and I think Chad's slide also did a nice job of laying out that process of what each project kind of takes to implement and see through. The last piece that I'll mention about the challenges is just that we have a real broad mix. We have a lot of owned city facilities, solar facilities, and we have these solar service agreements. And the city-owned facilities, the challenge is the maintenance and upkeep. We're in the process of updating our contract language. And so my advice at a really high level is the solar service agreements or power purchase agreements are a really attractive option if you don't have a lot of resources available to you. Because if there are issues with the solar systems or they go down, it can be a real challenge as you're trying to budget, and it can create issues for you. And when in the solar service agreement, the ownership company has a vested interest in making sure those remain up and operational all the time. So that's at a high level, just sort of everything I wanted to talk about, and I'll pass it on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Michael. I think everything the city of Tucson is doing with solar energy and just kind of the vision that your solar energy work lays out is really inspiring, and hope others find it to be so as well. And I'm excited to pass it off next to John Odell, the director of the City Energy and Asset Management Division in Worcester, Massachusetts. I think it'll be great to hear a little bit more about solar energy work in that community, seeing as, it's a totally different policy landscape as well as environment physically than in Tucson, and goes to show that solar can be a great solution anywhere. So thank you so much, Michael, and we'll be sure to loop back to you for questions at the end. John, you should be unmuted and good to go.
Oh, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So to get started, I think that was a great segue. As you pointed out, Tucson is a very different environmental climate than Worcester. We just recently were the snow capital of any city over 100,000 in the continental United States just a couple of years ago. So it's probably doesn't snow as much in Tucson, is my guess. So as to your point, Emma, that it's a very different environment, and yet solar still is very effective for us. So if you head on to the first slide there. There we go. I think it's important to start by giving a little historical context for everybody. There we go. None of these projects occur in a vacuum, and so we'll walk you through how we did it here in Worcester. And some of the examples may not apply if you're outside of Massachusetts, but I think many of them will. Next slide. So the first bit is way back in 2006-07, the city developed its first climate action plan. If you click again. And you can see the first sustainability position, which happened to be my position, came on board in 2009. The good-looking gentleman on the left there is my former boss, Joel Fontaine, who was instrumental in a lot of the stuff that we've done here in Worcester ever since. And the guy on the right's me. So next slide. So the first option, first item that we did is we completed an investment grade audit of all our facilities. So we have about 150 or so buildings, city and school owned buildings that we looked at to do a portfolio of projects, not just solar, but a whole wide range of projects to save energy, solar being among them. In 2010, we were designated a green community by the state's DOER's Green Communities program, one of the first in Massachusetts to be so designated. In 2011, we created the Worcester Energy Program, which is to lead by example to improve energy efficiency and to increase renewable energy. Next. And then lastly, for this slide is in 2011, we basically executed an energy performance contract with Honeywell in our case to implement a whole bunch of measures across 92 of those 150 or so buildings. Included in that were a couple solar projects. In 2013, we created a new division to basically manage all this work. It's the project, $26 million project. We basically brought that in-house so that we could not be managing it out of the planning department, which it currently had been, and now is being managed onto its own. Next. In 2013 through 2017, this is where we basically did additional amendments to the original project, the $26 million project, and we installed a whole bunch of solar. This is where this ties in with the topic of today, of course. We installed solar on 10 different sites, 9 different sites rather, 10 different projects. One site got both a canopy and a roof solar installations. And the total value for all those is about $55 million worth of solar installed. Next. And then one of the last projects, solar projects, most recent that we did in that suite of 10 projects was the big one, which was an 8.1 megawatt solar project on our landfill, a capped landfill that really wasn't, could not have been used for really much else. So this ends up being a very productive use of that site. Next. So we'll walk you through, again, the timeline. So this is early in the first phase of work back in 2011-14. The blue ones are projects that were done through outside of that energy services contract. The green ones are ones that we started doing through that. Click again. Phase 2, we did 4 schools. Click again, including a solar canopy project. And then very quickly, you'll notice a little confusion on phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 3 actually was, the contract was signed before the contract was signed after phase 2, but the work commenced before phase 2. So there's a little bit of an odd thing there happening with the timeline. But basically, they were all done roughly at the same time frame in 2016. And if you click once more, you can see the solar array, and also we did an array over at this new school that was built, the Nelson Place School, through a different project. And next. So this is the landfill project. You can see this is during the non-snowy season. This is about 26 acres of capped landfill that we basically covered with solar array. This is the largest municipally owned solar array in New England. It is basically produces just about 10 million kilowatt hours per year. It's pretty substantial, and in our case, and it varies from state to state, but in our case, the financial prospect was such that it very, very much made sense for us to own the project. In fact, all these projects are owned by the city. We don't do a purchase power agreement with for any of these projects. The city owns and manages and operates all of them. We do, however, outsource the maintenance of these to a third party. Next. So, like I mentioned earlier, none of this stuff happens in a vacuum. So part of the important things that helped us make this work is that in 2008, the state passed the Green Communities Act, which allowed us to fund a whole bunch of this energy efficiency and renewable energy work. Next. The Renewable Portfolio Standard, which was passed, as you can see, in 2003 and then strengthened in 2008, allowed for solar renewable energy credits, which is a significant incentive that used to exist here in Massachusetts. It's since the incentive continues for those projects that were built during the time frame before it ended last year. Right up through 2018, and now a new program, the SMART program, is now in existence. But those renewable energy credits are very valuable. We also have in Massachusetts the option of selling our virtually selling net metering credits, which I know a lot of other communities do as well. So we actually have two major incentives that occurred during the time frame that we installed these projects. And all this stuff was made possible in part through doing our energy ESPC. That tool of using Honeywell basically to go out and do the work for us allowed us to basically keep our the work done by professionals, so we could basically remove a lot of the risks that come with municipally owning it up front. So we get them, they're basically guaranteed the production of the unit for a year. And so that tool, though we do pay a little bit of a premium up front, we thought, given the value of the project as a whole, which we'll get to in a second, it turned out to be a very good choice on our part. Next slide. So here are the financials. So for the solar, we did it, as I mentioned, over basically 4 phases. The 4 phases, the fourth one is the big one. That was where the solar landfill project occurred. The total costs were about $40 million. Revenues from most of these costs came to about $71 million, and that includes both the solar renewable energy credits, the net metering, and of course the energy savings that occurred, the direct energy savings we had when they were on a rooftop, for example. And the net is that we're over 20 years going to be about $31.5 million to the good. That's not bad. That's a pretty good show. Next. And of course, though, that's as good as that is, and which helped drive the project to make everybody who wasn't a believer in solar. It's not just the renewable energy credits that's so important. It's what you get out of it, which is the avoided CO2, of course, and that's pretty significant here. And for Worcester, with the average home using about 625 kilowatt hours a month, translate that into how many homes are now being powered essentially from the sun. The equivalent is about almost 1,600, which is significant. Next. So heading near the end here, but there's a lot of financial benefits. I think you saw the big number, which was the big thing, but there was no cost to the taxpayers or the school budget to fund the project. We, as I mentioned, were able to sell those solar renewable energy certificates and the net metering credits, avoided electrical delivery charges, reduced peak demand, And as a byproduct, for 6 roofs that we put solar on, we were able to put essentially reseal the roof with a white roofing compound that not only extended the life of the roof another 20 years, it makes the solar more effective. Keeps the roof cool, which is the solar works better. Next. And then we'll close with the second to last slide here, is that there are a lot of other benefits too. And I think Chad and Michael and Emma have all mentioned some of them, but just to highlight them, there's climate resiliency, which is a huge thing nowadays, especially if you couple some of these solars with projects with batteries in the future. It's a big deal. It can give you a lot of reliability that you just didn't have before. Educational, we put them on the schools in part for a reason, not just because they're great locations for, but because of the educational opportunities. We've had field trips over to this landfill, several field trips already. People are really interested in seeing it. Just the scale of it's pretty impressive. There's comfort factor, particularly with those white roofs that keeps the buildings cooler in the spring, summer, and early fall here. It does actually get surprisingly hot here in New England in the summertime, even though it doesn't, it gets quite cold in the winter. And then lastly, but by no means least, visibility. And really that translates to leading by example. It is contagious. I like that word. I often use the word, you can get infected by it, but contagious seems to work better. When you see solar, you're more inspired to do solar at your own house or business. And that's it. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. Great to hear about all of the great work that Worcester is doing with solar and the benefits you're seeing as well. That is definitely helpful. So we luckily have about 10 minutes here until 3 p.m. Eastern for questions. So if anyone has a question, feel free to put it in the chat, either to everyone or to all panelists, or to raise your hand as an attendee. I haven't seen any yet, so I actually want to start off with one, and I'll keep an eye out in the meantime. Michael or John, this could be for either of you. I am wondering if your communities and your cities spent any time, setting energy goals and solar energy goals before getting started with all of these, municipal projects, or if that is going to be a part of your plan moving forward. I'd love to hear about that.
Do you want to start, Sean?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. So back in 2007, we did in our climate action plan, which we haven't updated since for a variety of reasons, but the initial 2007 climate action plan did set a goal for clean energy for the city. It was quite modest, but it was enough to sort of get the ball rolling. Since then, we are actively contemplating becoming another one of the 100% renewable green cities pledge for 2040 or 2035. We haven't decided yet. That I think is imminent in the not too distant future, but it hasn't been made official yet. So really, we don't have a goal to attain right now. We're just doing it because everyone recognizes the importance of it, both in terms of the the climate crisis that we're dealing with, but also the financial benefits have been significant so far. So people are all on board because it's such a win-win.
That's great. Part of the reason why I punted on that question is we don't have any formally adopted. We have some internal city conservation goals. We had a council member run on a 100% renewable platform who was elected and started about a year and a half ago. But we have no formal goals, although it's not going to be long before I'm creating them. We're working on a green fund currently to support energy efficiency, which I think is a really important and understated part of this that kind of gets overlooked because solar is so tangible and visible. So I'm in support of that, and then we'll probably develop a more formal climate action plan. We have one adopted. We haven't taken a lot of action or report back on it, but looking to probably update that in the near future as well.
Awesome. Yeah, sometimes the chicken or the egg comes first, but I'm always curious to hear how cities are thinking about that. That's great. And then I see Dave put a question in the chat asking about wastewater treatment facilities. Do either of your communities have solar on wastewater treatment facilities, or are you aware of any, neighboring examples that you'd want to mention?
Yes, I can speak for Worcester. Worcester, the wastewater treatment facility that treats water from Worcester actually does it for a few of the other smaller surrounding towns as well. So we represent about 90% of the load through there. And so the wastewater treatment facility has installed solar there. It is frankly a relatively small amount, and their energy use is very high. So they're looking at potentially doing more, but at this point they've installed a few hundred kilowatts of kW worth of solar, but I think the expectation is that they're going to install some more to help offset that. It's a great way to, as Michael had put earlier, to manage your costs over the long term. If you're a believer that solar costs are, well, first of all, once you install it, the price is the price. You know exactly what it's going to cost you in terms of how much you're going to be paying on the debt to pay off the bonds or whatever financing mechanism you used, or if you go through a PPA, you know exactly what your bill is going to be. It's very helpful that way, especially for a wastewater treatment facility where their volumes vary from season to season so dramatically. It's a great way to level the field. So I know our folks are looking to expand on that because of the benefits financially, and of course, as a side benefit, they get a big climate and an environmental benefit as well, I should say.
Definitely, that's great.
Yeah, for us, the main wastewater treatment plant is owned by the county, and I know they have solar there. We have some water treatment plants though as well that where we can, there is solar. It just depends on the footprint and the land available there. And since we are the water utility, we do have other water projects that that's the two projects that we have existing that were solar service agreements. Those are both large water facilities. So there are huge opportunities there. And I know the county is also working on methane capture and conversion to renewable natural gas as well here at the wastewater treatment plant, which is another neat opportunity.
Great. Yeah, and I definitely, not off the top of my head, but I also know of a couple other examples and would be happy to share them with you, Dave, after the fact, or with anyone else who is wondering about that, which is a good quick segue to just say I wanted to make sure to get this in before we wrap up, that we do have a fact sheet, Environment America does, on powering public buildings with solar as part of our 10 ways your community can go solar toolkit. So if you want more information about the things we've talked about, feel free to check out that toolkit. I put the short link here, and I'm also happy to share it with anyone. And I also want to provide my personal contact information if you have any questions we didn't get answered today, or follow-up, or questions even for our speakers. Feel free to reach out to me. And you can also join our Mayors for Solar Energy project through the short link at the top of this slide. If you want to get information and updates about future events like this webinar series, as well as other resources we're releasing. So feel free to go online, learn more about that project, or reach out to me directly. So now that I've got that out of the way, I do see a couple other questions in our Q&A section that are related to solar as well as electric vehicles and charging stations, which is an excellent question. We want to use solar energy to power every part of our communities, including our transportation. So I'd love to throw those questions to Michael and John and see if you have any experience with connecting solar to electric vehicle charging.
Absolutely. We are running, when we're making the interconnections to the panels, we're running conduit for electric vehicle charging stations. I know that solar and electric vehicle charging seem to go hand in hand, but you want to make sure you have that power quality from the panel. And so we're including that conduit so that we can go back and install electric vehicle charging at these mostly public places where we're installing. So it's a great question, and I think something that should totally be included included and considered as part of these projects, so you're not going back and having to double up your infrastructure costs.
Absolutely. Awesome. I'm glad to hear your community's doing that, and I know many others are. And we've also put out some reports and information about electric vehicle charging and those opportunities. I know that there are a few other questions. I see some raised hands, but unfortunately we are out of time. We've just got a matter of seconds left here. But please do go ahead and take down my information. I'm more than happy to talk more. And so appreciate everyone joining. Oh, I see someone just wants to see our toolkit link. There we go. So go ahead and jot that down too. And I'm happy to provide all of this material after the fact as well. We will record this webinar and put it on YouTube. So thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day.